right now, so we'll just get into it.
Yeah.
So keep going. Whatever
going.
you were saying.
Yeah, I started to overcook the record. And it's a good metaphor because that's what I do for a living is I'm a cook. I have a red seal. I'm a journeyman. That's who I am in the daytime hours. I'm a cook. I'm an Anthony Bourdain, or a Gordon Ramsay of sorts, whoever your favorite chef is. And, with the prevalence of mom blogs, I don't know how much people follow chefs these days, but I come from the generation of you followed a chef, whoever it was. You made fun of Guy Fieri, and you watched Bobby Flay, and you either loved him or you hated him, but you found somebody and you followed them.
Even Joe Rogan didn't like Guy Fieri. Yeah. That tells you something.
It sure does.
Yeah.
It sure does.
Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Jon Harris, a multi-musician, instrument, practitioner, released a debut album, Parallel Heart. We're going to break this down this episode, breaking down the artist, breaking down the album, talking about what's next, talking about everything from concept to, favorite tracks to, some funny questions near the end. With that, again, thank you for coming out. For the audience or listeners that are kind of hearing from you for the first time, how would you kind of describe yourself if you were to describe yourself to just first time?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks for having me on again. That's a great honor to be here. My name is John. Like I said, I'm a cook. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I've got 2 dogs, a husky and a shepherd. They're both rescues, so that will tell you something a bit about my wife and I. We'd rather go that route and rescue some pups, and it was half-price puppy day, so that was a fun day. And now the little munchkin, he's a huge dude. Our shepherd, he's a huge dude. But yeah, his name is Poe, and our husky, his name is Izzy or Isabel, and I absolutely love them. The kids are great. Gabriel is 11, and he helped me actually quite a bit with the record.
Yeah, because he featured on drums on one of the songs.
On one of the songs, Manoy Noi. And he actually came up with the name Manoy Noi. And he was kind of embarrassed, like, no, Dad, don't put it on the record. I'm like, okay, I won't if you don't want me to. But I want to feature you. He takes drum lessons at our local Long and McQuaid. Shout out to our drum instructor, Corey. And I just said, come up with a drum beat so I can riff over it. And I jokingly said, or half jokingly, because Ryan, I sat down to write this record thinking I would come up with like a power metal record. Like I would write up like Conan the Barbarian, and that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. What ended up happening instead is what I came to know as Parallel Heart. I have so many interests, kind of like a Renaissance man of sorts. I'm into cooking, I'm into music, I'm into martial arts, I'm into training for athleticism and fitness, like going for a run, or hence martial arts, or stretching, yoga, weightlifting, or weight training rather. And what I found out musically is there's an artist by the name of Modest Yahoo who said something like, I didn't need to tell myself to believe, I needed to drop the doubt. And instead of sitting down and saying, ugh, that sounds too 80s, throw the riff out. Ugh, that sounds too 70s, throw the riff out. Ugh, that sounds too funky, throw the riff out. You know what I said, Ryan? Great. Let's run with that. Let's make it sound as funky as we can. That sounds 80s? Awesome. Let's make it sound as 80s as we can. And I went with it. And then I blacked out and I woke up and the record was done.
So one question I want to ask is, when I think of like the different tones, I would say, or like styles, but I feel like that like underrates it too much. But did some tracks take like a longer period of time because you would almost have to set yourself in like an emotional, like I'll give you an example. Like if I'm playing a scary game like Resident Evil, it's like I can't play it today in the heat and the light. Like I wait till it's dark, spooky, I have all the lights off, because like I actually want to set the tone for like this experience. Now, would you say in terms of making music, would you say like, oh, well, if I was like pissed off or something, like making this funky beat might not be exactly possible, but it might derive like a totally different track? And was that something you experienced?
Yeah, I can answer your question. It is a good question, and I understand where you're going with it. There's like an arc in working on an album. And that arc is, I start off with, let's say, one song, and all I have is that one song. And there's almost like this quiet desperation, like, work, damn you, work. And then once I have more ideas, by the time we get to, say, 10 ideas that are working, if I'm not in the mood, or I know I'm not in the mood to work on one song, maybe there's another one that I can work on. And there is an element of irony to the record. I'm a very sarcastic, cynical, deadpan humor kind of guy. And I found that does come through on the record in places. There's points where I'm having a temper tantrum on the guitar that I was able to emulate. Like there's a song called My Little Lady that's about my daughter. Mm-hmm. And there's, in the second verse, I kind of have this little temper tantrum thing like she does. The song Parallel Heart is almost about this internal emotional struggle of, I just want to believe in myself and I want to be okay with myself. A lot of this was done during the pandemic, where I still downloading that period of time and what happened to me and to all of us during that period of time. Because in the moment it was like, hey, it's like a sleepover. Let's just have a lockdown and it'll be great. Well,
and then it was like, I don't know if this is going to end.
Yeah, exactly. And then supply chain issues and wars are breaking out. So the song Togetherness, I kept thinking of a new name for it, because if you listen to that song and if you take the beat out of that song, it's actually a very sad song. I kept, why do I want to call this song Togetherness? I said, because that's, I think, the question that the pandemic posed. Are we really together as humans? Are we really together with ourselves? Humpty Dumpty was actually about a point where my wife and I were kind of struggling a little bit in our marriage. And maybe I was struggling with myself a bit more too at that point. But unfortunately, the way we are psychologically, I was focusing more on the relationship part. And I just wrote the song Humpty Dumpty and just said, like, I've fallen over, we've fallen over. Can we get back up? All the king's horses and all the king's men are trying to put us back together. Can we get back together? Mm-hmm. And we did. And it's absolutely incredible. And I don't think we were really in that dire of straits, but in that moment, that's how it felt. So it was definitely a big creative outlet in terms of what was going on at that time. And the next thing to answer to that, Ryan, is inspiration for music. Music is a funny thing. We need an instrument to be able to convey it, but otherwise, like, I could cook you a meal, you can touch it, you can taste it, you can smell it. You can't do any of that with music.
Right. And it's all, a lot of it's, well, with cooking too, but it's opens the door. And I had other artists on, and the same thing that they talk about is like, it's hard to like baseline it because it's all like subjective.
Correct.
Right. And like, there's nothing tangible. It's like, you know, I could feel a certain way, but like, that's a personal experience. And like, for sure, someone might not have like felt that before. Right.
Yeah. So the only way to really gain inspiration to write music is to just sit down and do mundane practicing on your instrument every day. And in the middle of practicing scales, in the middle of practicing maybe somebody else's music, I spent a lot of time studying Ian DeSaw of Billy Talent.
Okay.
As far as his music was concerned, I spent a lot of time studying Prince. I spent a lot of time studying Nile Rodgers. So that's where I started noticing all this funky stuff coming out.
So by studying, do you mean a lot of like just like taking like their music in, watching, or is it a lot of like emulating as well, of like trying to like perform the same as them? Because one of the questions that I kind of just thought in my head, and I remember like watching something, and it was like the 1948 or whatever, and it was Chocolate. They were singing Chocolate, and and I thought to myself, like, if anybody else sung this and it wasn't them, would it have came out the same? Maybe this was just like a dud that just got flushed down the Spotify toilet, and like nobody ever. And you say like it's that weird that like you look at the amount of people and voices, and like it's just kind of creating your own identity and then finding the people that kind of like fuck with your shit. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy that you like it's the same thing where you kind of try to be like something, and then it's like you just develop your own kind of thing. Yeah. So like continue with that.
For sure. It's not like for example, playing a video game, I could be playing a video game, but it's not like all of a sudden I go, a riff, and then it hits me. It could, but it's pretty rare. Usually when inspiration strikes is when I have the instrument in my hand, I'm warmed up, I'm playing, and because I'm so bored, Ryan, doing what I'm forcing myself to do, because it's the P word, practice. It's horrible, right? Nobody wants to do it. Put
reps in.
Yeah, but you got to put your reps in. You got to go to the gym. You've got to duke it out. No pain, no gain. And if you think of your musical instrument the same way you think of bodybuilding or a martial art or anything else, you got to warm up. You got to do your calisthenics. You got to do your basic training, in this case, music theory. Maybe, like I said, pick somebody else's music. So I've got the sheet music for a Prince song or a Nile Rodgers song. And then you start veering off course and you go, what if I did this chord progression faster? What if I did this chord progression slower? What if I did this chord progression in major instead of minor? And then now you start flexing your muscles, right? Now you're doing the part of the bodybuilding where you're looking in the mirror and you're flexing and you're posing, which is isometric exercises and practicing for later on down the line when you're doing on competition. So there's all these parallels that you can make, again, parallel heart, to one discipline to another. Same thing goes with cooking. I'm working with an onion and a chicken. Okay, are we making Korean tonight? Are we making Mexican tonight? Are we making Indian tonight? Everybody has an onion. Everybody has a chicken. How are we expressing those flavors? And what template are we using? So with me studying those artists, did I also watch them? Of course I did. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger said he used to study pictures of Reg Park. And it's like Tony Robbins says, success leaves clues. I want to go do blah. Who's already done it?
Yeah. And exactly.
Who's already done it? And so, yeah, I rented the movie Purple Rain from Prince.
Yeah.
And I watched it. And I sat there in absolute awe. And he's obviously developed himself up to that point. And that's where you have to go, that's incredible. And then just start going back from there. Okay, what was it like? What was he like before that? What was he like before that? And then you start watching a music video from his first album, which was years before that.
Right.
Where he's nowhere near as polished, right? Easily could have just gone under the radar, and for all intents and purposes probably did, but he kept working and growing, right? So that's how you study music, is you sit there and you look at the sheet music or you listen to it and you go, okay, let's break it down. As clinical as it sounds, I'm not going to enjoy this song. As much as I'm like going like this.
You're also like dissecting it.
Yeah, I have to ask myself, why am I doing this right now? What's going on in this song that no matter how hard I try, I can't stop doing this? And answer that question. Now comes the hard part. Because when I teach you how to cook, there's a recipe and we can judge your execution of that recipe. Either it's French onion soup or it's not, right?
Yeah, or it's shit.
Yeah. Right? Or for example, in bodybuilding or weight training, you're doing a bench press correctly or you're not.
Right.
Music, on the other hand, is funny because I'll teach you how to, this is what Prince did. Now here's a blank Pro Tools screen with nothing on it.
Recreate it.
You
should be able to. It's right there.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Why can't it sound the same?
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
You know, the guy already did it.
Exactly. So that's where I like, if it were, it's not like, for Metallica as an example, it's not like they don't know or understand what makes Enter Sandman a great song. And that was another one that I broke apart too, because a lot of great songs I broke apart. But songwriting isn't easy. Otherwise, every song they would have done would have been Enter Sandman, but it can't be that way.
Yeah. It's interesting. And when you look at like your attitude in terms of like learning or education, I would say, or like just honing skills, have you always been that person, or was there like a period of like kind of hard reset where you're like, oh, I have to like figure out a new way of doing things because like what I'm doing just like it ain't it?
Yeah, I still have those moments.
Yeah.
I call it coming up for air.
Yeah. I call it touching grass.
Yeah.
I'm like, we just got to come down, touch grass for a bit, stay grounded because like we're losing the plot.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I call it coming up for air. Every now and I'm like snorkeling. I'm like, oh, this is fun. And then I come up for air and I'm like, wait a minute. this isn't the island I thought I was going to be at.
Right.
And then, well, why? And I try and figure it out. I was a musician before. I was in some bands before in my 20s. Then I moved to Alberta for oil and gas, came for the money, stayed for the love. I met my wife, had our son at the time. And that's when I decided to take a break from music. And that's when I started the podcast. Okay, maybe I don't want to be in a band per se or be a musician, but I still want to be in the music industry. I know there's tons of sorry saps out there who want to be a musician, so I can interview these people. So I did that for quite a long period of time. And in that time, I was able to see the music industry from what I call the back end, that a lot of musicians don't get to see. I got to experience talking to record labels, more as a journalist than as a musician, but I got to talk to record labels, got to know people at record labels, tour managers, band managers, musicians that I've looked up to for years. The first time I talked to Bjorn from Soilwork, I was actually under my desk, like heaving in a paper bag. The Skype window was up. He called, and I was just like, like there he was, right? And he answered, nicest dude in the world, Swedish, so he's totally bubbling over.
It's crazy how small the world has become in that way. And like, have you ever had a moment in that like podcasting journey when you like message someone, they were like, sure, and you're like, oh fuck, can I do? Oh no, like I'm totally in over my head.
When it got to bigger artists, for sure.
Yeah,
I started to have I'm sure there's a name for it, but am I really good enough to do this?
Yeah, mine, like, I always say to myself, like, not only am I going to, like, fuck it up, am I going to fuck it up for them? So I can make myself look bad. That's fine. Yeah. But, like, am I asking, like, super stupid questions? Am I, like, cutting them off? Am I, like, lining them up and, like, saying corny joke? Right? Because then it's going to make them look like a bad guest. Right? And that's my consideration, especially when you look at like the perspective of everything where it's like, hey, some people might actually be like sticking their neck out for you. Right? Or like at least anything. I have friends, like I have a friend that he's been on the show multiple times, and I always consider like, well, I look at how like he carries himself at work and like how he likes to represent himself, and like it could be very easy to just like set this guy up.
Oh, for sure.
Ask just like super fucked up questions, and now this guy doesn't know how to answer, and you're like, what? You can't answer it?
Yeah. Why
What's going on? Why'd you come on the show then?
Yeah.
If you can't, and then the whole narrative is just like, and then I get back to the computer, I start clipping stuff. You know what I mean? And now all of a sudden, like I take out a little bit of the start, I take out a little bit of the end, and now whatever he's saying is totally. So the amount of responsibility you have in your hands, especially when people that you would consider to be like higher than you on the totem pole.
Oh, for sure.
It's kind of like one of those, come to Jesus moments where you're like, oh God.
Yeah. There was one time or a couple of times I had responsibility in my hands. The biggest one that comes to mind is several years ago before the pandemic, Arch Enemy boo-booed, and they boo-booed big time. And I was slated to have an interview with Arch Enemy backstage when they came through Edmonton. And I was sitting down with Charlie, who's the bass player, who's also in a band called the Night Flight Orchestra. And I had a choice as an interviewer when I was sitting down with Charlie backstage to bring up this scandal and hammer on this scandal. But I put myself in his shoes, a dude who's just showing up to work. And I just asked myself, if I were showing up to work, would I want a scandal thrown in my face? And the answer was no.
And knowing that it's just for monetary purpose. Like, for all consideration, you probably don't really give a fuck. Like, what what's going to happen to that person.
Yeah.
It's like, I just know this is going to, like, kick up some dust.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. And for what reason and to what end?
Yeah. What's the motivation?
Exactly. So I chose to not bring up that scandal. We didn't even talk about it at all. He appreciated the interview. I mentioned loosely, because my wife is a huge Night Flight Orchestra fan, and I said, hey, buddy, before we talk about this Arch Enemy band you're in, let's talk about the Night Flight Orchestra. My wife wants to know when you guys are working on a new album. And he was like floored. He was so excited. Like, whoa, you know about my other band? Because at the end of the day, regardless of whether you've been a musician for 25 years or just starting out, or you've been in the industry and you're a veteran, and no matter what age you're at, it's so nice to be able to travel around the world and meet people face to face who enjoy your creative efforts. Because until the modern day where we have way too much information available, like Nirvana had no idea if I listened to their music. Led Zeppelin had no idea if I listened to their music. I can now go look and see at what point somebody stopped listening to one of my songs.
Yeah.
Like, that's
the analytics are, and it if you don't have an understanding of the analytics, I think it also is a huge like factor of people quitting like prematurely.
Oh, for sure.
Because they look at it and you're like, you just don't okay, say I have 500 views and my average view time is 15 seconds. Well, that doesn't mean that one person didn't watch 30 minutes.
Correct.
It's just a lot of people click on and click off. Correct. And like, consider yourself as the average day consumer and say, how critical am I of the content that I'm ingesting? How many times am I swiping through content? And what's the criteria that like subconsciously I'm going through of like, audio is choppy. Oh, video's a little scrappy.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is. No subtitles. Boom. Right? So then you go through your head and you say, oh man, I really have to like nail like those type of things down. But you can't take them at face value because a lot of it's like chopped and screwed. And then it's like, oh, say you pay a guy $20 to promote your shit. And then you're like, why is 90% of my traffic out of Bangladesh and India? You're like, oh, this guy's botting my stuff, right? But it's those little learning lessons, but you have to kind of be very like sober minded and be like, not everything is what it seems. Yeah. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Correct. And like you said, you just got to touch grass. And that's something that my wife says. She says, people just need to go touch grass these days. And it's true. You know, so that's where, speaking of goals for this year outside of music, is to, okay, let's touch grass. So, you know, I've enrolled in a 10K for later this year.
Yeah.
To start training for that 10K.
I did a 10K probably 2 years. It was a Michelob Ultra like night run or whatever. Okay. And I always loved like longer distance running. I enjoyed like the I don't think traditional weight training and stuff puts you in like that much of like a psychological like fuckery where like you're like, am I going to die?
Yeah.
What has been your experience training like longer running? Was it a hard thing to get used to, like boredom, or was it like cramps, aches? Like, what was the biggest challenge for you?
This is going to sound really funny, Ryan. The biggest challenge for me, and I guess it's because I'm old enough to remember what life was like before having cell phones. So I'm part of this strand, straddling some generations, and that's its own thing.
Yeah.
But I go without my cell phone.
So no music,
no podcasts, nothing in my ears. All I have is myself to keep myself company and to talk myself through it. Okay, I can make it to that stop sign. Okay, we did it. You know what? I can make it to that electrical thing over there. Okay, I can do that. Can I get a little bit further? I don't know if I can do it. Yeah, you can do it. Now I'm coaching myself and I'm talking to myself. But at the same time, it also allows me to clear my head a little bit more and work out ideas. And it's so hard to describe to somebody who's never gone that distance. But I would say up to 5K is pretty much just pain, but once you get past the 5K, something changes mentally.
Yeah, they have what's called like a phase 1 and phase 2 running. So like a phase 1 running, I'm not sure what it is, like statistically wise, but one is like a set rate, like heart rate. And then you go over a certain period of time and like just through your like training your body, you're able to like level out your heart rate to a lower degree to like sustain yourself for a longer period. But yeah, it is. And it's interesting to note how a lot of your journey from like start to 5K is like a lot like physical, and then after that it's mostly mental.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's mainly after that it's like, am I like focusing on what I need to focus on? How's my gait? How am I going heel to toe? Am I going toe to heel? Well, maybe that's why my calf's cramping. Like, you know, so things like that, I think it's very, very interesting, because then like all the structure goes, like all the structure of what to do, like now the rule book's out of the window.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't matter now, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like traditional weightlifting, it's like, okay, more weights, more calories, more weights, more calories, more weights, more calories.
Yeah.
And I'll get heavier.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is, right?
Yeah.
But with running, it's like there's some people that mentally can't get to a half marathon. They mentally can't, like they have the capability. Mm-hmm. They just like, they can't. The anxiety is just too much of like, I'm going to die, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's about letting go.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And after this 10K, do you think like this is just like one step, or is this like something that you've slated as like, this is the dart on the board?
So I'm decided to leave that up to my future self. And the criterion I'm more than likely going to base on it is, once I do the event, how did I like it? If I liked it, then I'm going to do it again next year, and I'm going to start competing with myself to do a better time. And that's just going to probably become my life. Every year, can I do a better time until I get, I don't know, first place or whatever. Then once I get first place, I'll have to ask my future self what that looks like. The other option is I do it and I say, cool, ticked it off the box, and now I'm in really good shape. I can just do maintenance of, say, 4 to 5K, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, too, a lot of people, they want to consider, like, what they want their physique to be as well. Because, like, with that amount of cardio, you have to consider that, like, you're burning a shit ton of calories.
Oh, for sure.
So, like, if someone's trying to, like, retain some sort of, like, physique in terms of, like, visually, it's like the reason a runner looks as a runner looks is because he's running a shit ton, and like he can't keep on weight, right?
Right.
So it's with that too, right? Of like it's a lot of maintenance, a lot of like mental like integrity. But yeah, that's fun. Good for you, man.
Oh,
Good for you.
Thank you.
I wish you the best. That should be really fun. Those events are always really good. Usually they're always like they're always for like a really good cause. They always usually like donate the money somewhere, or these runs are always like fundraised for something else.
Yeah.
So yeah. But let's get back to talking about the album. We kind of veered off there, but I want to know what it was like making an album while also having like this home studio, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of how did that aid, as well as kind of like fuck your shit up a bit and with the creative process? Because with me, like having a studio in my apartment, I know how like intertwined it is with my life and how much discipline I need to have of like time management.
Yeah.
Now, when making the album, was that like a consideration for you?
Yeah, I've always been really good at time management, probably too good at time management. The only way to really have goals is to make time for them, and to make time for them, you just have to know. And then I've learned a lot of discipline for time management in culinary, because, hey, dinner service is at 5. Like, we got to go. So learning how to multitask, learning how to delegate to your team, how to have a team, how to know who's responsible for what. So having a studio in the home is both a blessing, because I could just go down there and work on stuff whenever I had time or whenever I had an inclination. The downside was that sometimes I'd be doing that with my daughter in my lap, and she's coloring and making a mess out of the desk, or there's other considerations to have. Though what I will say is that if there was a co-producer, it was my wife, and she would walk by, I'd be working on something, and she was very keen that the record had a particular sound to it. So to take a step back, Ryan, for probably 10 years of knowing her, she never once said anything about my guitar playing, and I never really thought about it. I would just kind of noodle and play the guitar. She knew that I was in bands beforehand, and why I had stepped away and taken time away or whatever. And then one day, this is a couple years ago now, she bought me a guitar for my birthday, which is the one that's on the cover. It's like a blue Fender Stratocaster. And this is at a time where I still maybe hadn't come up for air yet, and I didn't really know who I was, but she did, which is one of the great reasons of being in a relationship, is it's like having that mirror that talks to you, right? And she said, here's a Fender Stratocaster. And I said, what am I supposed to do with a Fender Stratocaster? She's like, well, you're a Strat guy, and you play like Jeff Beck. Go make an album. And I went, what?
Yeah.
That's a lot of information. So I'm a Strat guy, which I've never once associated myself with a Stratocaster. And I sound like, who? Really? Seriously? Jeff Beck? Are you kidding me? Wow, I'm good? And she was like, yeah, you're good. And I never mentioned Jeff Beck because you don't seem to like Jeff Beck. And I was like, that's nonsense. Sorry you never heard me listen to Jeff Beck, but wow, okay. And a lot of the guitar players that I look up to and admire, George Lynch of Dokken fame and Lynch Mob, and his own solo stuff, very much influenced by Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix. Kirk Hammett of Metallica, very much influenced by Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix. So even though maybe I spent more time studying Kirk Hammett's guitar solos, Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix were behind those guitar solos, and so it all just kind of trickles down. So I'm like, I'm actually not surprised, but whoa, okay. Part of what I had to get over, Ryan, was understanding that I'm there. I'm good enough. I can do it. I've got the skills. I don't need to work on anything else to make an album. I just need to do it, which is funny because I never really thought of myself that way, because if I go back 10 years before that, I was in a band. I was playing music. I was only doing one part of it. I wasn't making the drums and the bass and the piano and the knickknacks and the tambourine. You know, I wasn't doing everything. I was just doing guitar. But now here I am wearing all the hats, doing everything. And back to a previous quote, I didn't need to believe. I just needed to drop the doubt. Like, I know how to do this, so get to work.
So what did that process look like in terms of going from being mainly a guitar player to then like transitioning? Were there any like key elements that you were able to like ground yourself in with another instrument that was like gave you the ability to learn it? Yeah.
The biggest step for me moving forward in terms of being able to orchestrate or arrange, let's say for a pop song format, to break it between classical and just what we'll call pop, was I went to audio engineering school. I call it school. I went to the Edmonton Public Library resources that are available. And there was training and certification programs available through the Edmonton Public Library, as well as books. So if you haven't gone to EPL, go to EPL.
That's right.
And by doing that, I was able to actually look at music from a broader perspective, where now instead of just thinking of it as a tambourine or a snare drum or a guitar or a vocal, you're now looking at it as an EQ curve. Okay, where does the guitar sit? Where does the snare drum sit? And now I start looking at, okay, let's go take a look at this AC/DC song that we've been talking about for 45 years. And we say it's really simple, but we've been still talking about it for 45 years. Knowing what I know about the EQ curve, how did they arrange their song? And all of a sudden, the page of sheet music starts speaking to me from that perspective. I just needed to make sure that I didn't step on anybody.
So now would then you learn like pacing and stuff in terms of like BPMs and like how fast do I want this to be? How slow? Like how many notes do I want in this? Like, would it be a bar? Yeah. Like,
a bar.
You'd be like, how many notes do I want in this? Do I want it to be wider? Do I want it to be longer? Do I want to let it breathe more?
Absolutely. So the number one thing that I worked on, Ryan, was what's called tempo, or beats per minute, because we only have 12 notes that we can work with, but there's a whole lot of tempo available. And I kept going back to certain producers that I admire, like whether it's a Mutt Lange or a Bob Rock or a Bob Clearmountain. And when you're listening to the music, kind of take the tempo for granted. But I started getting into a lot of music that was centered on groove. So getting into that 70s funk, something like a Baby Huey or a Brothers Johnson or a Quincy Jones. And you start reading about Quincy Jones and he's talking about groove. Okay, well, what's groove? You start looking into groove. And then you start listening to Mutt Lange talking about dialing in certain tempos so that the songs sound good in arenas. And he's only willing to work with arena-based tempos. And now you start getting into the Nickelbacks and certain phases of their career where they're working with Mutt Lange. Okay, well, why were they in a certain tempo? What does that mean? And then I started looking at Bob Rock, and I said, what's the number one thing he did on the Black Album, or so he says he did on the Black Album? And he said tempos. I'm like, okay, what does that mean, Ryan?
Yeah, it's still very baseline. You're like fast, slow, fast. Turtle, bunny, turtle, bunny, turtle, bunny.
Yeah. And so when you're learning how to write songs, that's why it can be so vague, because I can give you the information to go write a song. Ryan, this is what you do. But you've still got to go to that blank Pro Tools screen where there's nothing there and create it. And as you create the song, it starts to have an identity of its own, whereby maybe you set out to have a certain tempo, but maybe the chord progression or the riff or the emotion you're looking for or the story you're trying to tell doesn't work at that tempo. So something that I did, like for example, there's a song called 97 BPM.
Yeah.
That was a drum loop of a 70s funk drum kit recorded with a mono mic in a huge room. And it was at like, I don't know, 132 beats per minute. Bing, bing, kappa, bing, bing, kappa, bing. And I just kept slowing it down in Pro Tools until we hit 97 beats per minute, and it just slapped.
Yeah. And then, and another thing too that I want to say is like, when you look at your album, it's like, you can see like the dynamic of like the expression, the note, where it's like you can have the note, but it's like you add a little bit of like, you know what I mean? You make it tense, you make it like a little slower, you drift it off, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not necessarily about the notes itself, it's also about like how are you playing the notes, and like are you allowing it like, you know what I mean? Like adding that like you know, a whammy or whatever it is, like with a guitar. And I'm talking like way out of my element. So if I say anything that doesn't make sense, it's because I don't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about.
No, it's fine. It's referred to generally as two different kinds. There's probably more than two different kinds of guitar players, but like a technical, I've kicked over a Pac-Man machine and we're just going to go. Then there's the other kind, which is what I call like the Jeff Beck school, or what my wife calls the Jeff Beck school, which is I'm going to pretend like I have a human voice, but it's this guitar. Mm-hmm. And yes, I've got this note, but what I'm going to do with that note. And that's the brilliance and beauty of, say, studying the blues, or potentially even studying the other forms of rock and roll that came up over time, is the blues really is about, I've got this note and I'm crying, I'm in pain, I got the blues. How am I going to make you feel that with this one note or maybe two notes? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot that you can learn in terms of that discipline. I've always considered myself more of a bluesy kind of player, and then I started getting into the funky stuff on this record, as well as other kinds of rock. And then even disseminating further from there that something magic actually really happens when you mix funk and, say, metal, or funk and blues, in which case, for example, you get like an explosion such as Limp Bizkit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where you've got R&B and funk drums.
Or like Beastie Boys.
Or Beastie Boys.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's something that's so uncommon.
Yeah.
Where people are like, oh shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's, you know, I even say like female rappers. Like that's another thing, like Doechii and a lot of these like female rappers that are starting to come out today. Because it's not like Cardi B and this and that, but like, if you look at like Lil Sims and like a lot of these UK rappers and stuff, it's just a fresh style. It's a fresh, different, and it's great. It's great that people are like testing boundaries and like pushing the limits. One thing that when I was listening to your music is like, with this type of music, or say the variety of it, has there ever been any like opportunities? Because when listening to like Mustard and Ketchup, it was like, yo, I could hear this at like the end of like a movie credit, or like something, you know what I mean? Like something that could be like inserted or composed. Now, is there, in this type of like industry, is there like a big like outlook for that, or is that like very niche of something you would have to like move away for, or like has that been anything you've ever explored before?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is called audio visual sync licensing. Right. And that happens for video games, that happens for movies, that happens for commercials, whereby either somebody actually writes directly, called a jingle, and then they're paid in terms of that licensing, or somebody writes a song like Bob Seger and a company like Chevrolet.
They want to use it for their commercial.
They want to use it for the commercial. So they pay Bob Seger a schwack of money up front, and then they pay him a schwack of money every time they play a commercial, or whatever the deal he and his lawyers work out. But that is called audio visual sync licensing. And I didn't write the music particularly for that, but I've always had it in mind because instrumental music is great for that. I am definitely not against that. I myself am looking for it, and so can our performing rights organization here in Canada is looking out for me in terms of sync licensing. So if anybody listens to my music and they want it to be sync licensed, contact me. You can also contact SOCAN.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that must be like learning of its own, of understanding that and understanding like, oh, is there a different type of science, or like, because it's a whole different beast. Like, even if you look at podcasting, the way that you would develop an audio only podcast as compared to an audio visual podcast is like two different stratospheres.
Oh, for sure.
In what you would like prioritize and purchase, and what, like, you wouldn't have to have staging like this, right? So it's very interesting because it's the same shit.
Yeah.
But now you're just going even deeper. You're
For
just
sure.
burrowing even deeper. So yeah, and getting into like the idea of like being consumer friendly. What were your considerations for not having vocals? And did you ever think that was going to affect you in terms of reach?
It is affecting me, and it will affect me. Vocal music has always and will always go further, farther, as long as the vocals are right. And that's a broad-ranging, vague term, because Bob Dylan's vocals are right for Bob Dylan's music, right? And then there are certain bands that couldn't go anywhere until they got a new singer. So Journey wasn't really going anywhere until they got a new singer. Creed really wasn't going anywhere until they got a new singer. Slipknot really wasn't going anywhere until they got a new singer.
So it's not part of the picture, but it might possibly be.
Yeah. And I don't know what that means, if it's the quality of the voice or if it's the way they were coming up with vocal melodies. You know, maybe Scott Stapp is better at coming up with vocal melodies than other guys. There's so much that can be talked about. That's a whole other podcast episode right there, right? What was so successful about Scott Stapp's voice at that point in time, you know, and granted, this was a different point in time too, where music, they played on the radio, people would call in and say, what was that? And then charts were produced, and then it would feed into feed into feed into feed. And then now, all of a sudden overnight, at a particular point in time, with only releasing 3 albums, Creed was huge. You know, or Nirvana only releasing a handful of albums, they were huge. I don't know that can happen these days because of how saturated everything is, and there's not really a chart system per se like there used to be.
And a lot of that again is like smoke and mirrors, where you're like, a lot of people are buying it, a lot of people like it's leveraged by so many other things, but like, and I always go back to like when people are like, no, it's about the art. It's like Macklemore beat Kendrick Lamar. I was like, you don't say less. I was like, for best album of the year. So it and not only best rap album. So get the fuck out of here. But it's interesting because like, how much do you have to gauge that in terms of like, well, in order to have some sort of success, I have to buy into the zeitgeist of like what they want or what's like consumer friendly. And if I don't, I can still do it, but I have to be transparent enough with myself to know what I'm kind of lining myself up for, right?
Yeah. No, it was a very conscious effort to come out with an instrumental record. I'm not very comfortable with my singing voice. I'm sure it's fine. I've been told it's fine. That's another, I'm probably just gonna have to let go of that doubt at some point to release, you know, and let everything fly, sort of speak, or whatever, and to sing. But my wife just said, just make an instrumental record. And as a result of having the podcast, I have contacts. So I sent out some demo tracks that I made, and there was a label that reached out and said, this sounds great. You know what? Despite the fact that it's instrumental, it still seems to tell a story. It still seems to be great. It still seems to be hitting all the things that a vocal record should make. And probably not the number one thing I hear, but a comment I hear a lot from people who get to hear the record is, it's like I can hear vocals. I know there's not vocals, but it's like I can hear vocals. And I did write the songs with a pop song structure in mind, because I looked at what a lot of other instrumental guitar players did that I grew up listening to. Joe Satriani, Eric Johnson, Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen. Jeff Beck is another one that we've mentioned before. And I took a look at those guys. At first, my wife said, go make an instrumental record, and I just gagged. And I said, I don't think the world needs another plate of spaghetti right now. You know, another instrumental guitar player. It's going to noodle all over everything. It's called noodling.
Right.
Another plate of spaghetti. Like, that's disgusting. So my wife was like, what are you talking about? So I showed her, you know, stuff that I grew up listening to where Yngwie is just going, and she's like, that doesn't do it for me. This is what does it for me. And she showed me a couple Jeff Beck records that she had in mind. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And she's like, I know you can do that. So go do it. And I was like, yes, dear. So it was a matter of, how do I tell a story over a pop song format? And instead of having verses of words, I had verses of notes and different melodic pieces to try and tell the story. And so I would come up with a riff or a chord progression. I would store it. I'd find a good tempo for it, make sure it's slapping. I would add in other knickknacks and things. Percussion is super important. Any budding musicians need to understand that a lot of great songs, the reason you're going like this
is the drums.
Yeah, the drums. Yeah. And then there's somebody with a shaker or a tambourine. Yeah,
because it kind of just sets the tone for the whole song.
It does.
Right?
And that's where I had to step back as a guitar player and instead look at it as a whole, as a production, as an arrangement, and say, okay, what needs to be bumping here aside from the tempo? Well, the drums are going to be carrying that. So the drums have got to hit. They've got to be the right parts. The kick has got to be right. All the percussion's got to be right. And percussion could be anything. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. There's shakers, tambourines, white noise. There's all sorts of things. Because I spent a lot of time listening to, for example, Prince. Lately, I've been rocking the first 3 Madonna albums. And back then, they were using drum machines. And it was the same drum machine almost on every single song. And there's so much you can do with that. So that's why the beats are constructed in a certain way. But if you really listen to some of that stuff, like the Lionel Richie stuff, the Phil Collins stuff, that's all the Don Henley stuff, it's all using the same drum machine. But what's making it work is the percussion. And there was percussion on those things. And sometimes it was real percussion. Other times it was
like electronic.
All electronic. And some of that is just out of necessity. An electronic clap sounds more like a real clap than a clap does.
And what style do you think that you were like most unfamiliar with in terms of like, if you were to like break down the different styles of like synth, pop, metal, like some classical rock, like what would you say was like the least unfamiliar to you and you had to like really learn as you went through the album?
Probably the R&B and the funk.
Yeah.
And it was like a history lesson. It was like a history of rock and roll. And that's when, even now, I'm starting to get into Frank Sinatra. Yeah. And really starting to bump the Frank Sinatra, because before we had rock and roll, we had like jazz, basically, and big band jazz. And Frank Sinatra was like the star of that until Elvis came in. And Elvis was like the next evolution of that signaled the end of big band. And now we're into rock and roll. And then from Elvis, we jumped to like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and then we jumped to Led Zeppelin. And so you see this evolution. Somebody recently said Led Zeppelin's just a crappy blues band. I was like,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. But they were definitely playing the blues. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
Right? So it's almost like every single generation just kind of looks and goes, okay, how can we sort of reinvent this wheel, so to speak? So what I was getting into was disco. Disco was something that I studied a lot. And I started asking the question, what is disco? And it's almost like grunge. Because disco, yes, there's disco beats, and there's ABBA, and there's Chic, and there's...
Like, how did that turn from that to, like, the rave music we have today? Where it was more of, like, you know, light build-ups, very, like upbeat tones, to now it's, like, pop, 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 right?
The short answer is technology.
Yeah.
That's
you could just speed it up.
Yeah, that's the short answer of it. The things that I can do on my home computer to make a kick drum sound larger than life and hit harder than a nail into wood is far surpassing what they could do back then. But I started reading from Nile Rodgers' biography, his autobiography. Nile Rodgers is the producer behind Chic. He also produced Madonna. He produced I can see it in my head, China Girl.
Okay.
Yeah, David Bowie.
Okay.
He produced China Girl. And so he wrote this biography, and then I started grabbing some of the Chic tunes, studying the bass line, studying the guitar, all that kind of stuff. And he basically made his original bread and butter doing disco. And then he watched the disco sucks movement, and he crashed. Nobody wanted disco anymore. Mm-hmm. But what he also talked about was how we still have dance music. So that's where it's like, okay, well, what exactly is disco? Because at the end of the day, disco is a song you dance to at a club. Mm-hmm. That's what Chic did.
Yeah.
They made songs that caused people to dance on a dance floor.
And it's still happening.
And it's still happening. So it's like, okay, well, there's grunge, but wasn't that just rock and roll, really, at the end of the day?
But then, some people, attribute there was a time of, a death of hip-hop, right? Where, at some point, there was, you had Nas, Tupac, Biggie, all these guys, and then it went into, rapping with pop and being featured with pop artists. Then it was country artists. Then it was mumble rapping. Then it was, SoundCloud rap, right?
Yeah.
So, and you kind of see, there's always been, a little, degradation,
degradation.
It slowly erodes over time of you can see that there's in the past there was someone that championed it, and then just a shit ton of people banana phoned it, and then the generation after, they went on to the dude that was second to the copying his shit, and then it just got, because now you're just what is it? Essentially, if you bang your cousins for so long, you're gonna get, you're gonna get problems with the fucking bloodline, right?
Yeah. And technology played a huge role in every single phase of that.
And now it's AI.
Yeah, and now it's AI, which is a whole another ball game.
Yeah. And do you find that's something you experiment with or at all, or is that what are your opinions in terms of intellectual property?
Well, obviously it should be protected.
Yes.
Right.
I just mean in terms of maybe I should readjust my question. In terms of artist authenticity. Mm-hmm. How do you think that AI is influencing that right now?
Yeah, I've definitely read articles of people who like to use AI tools to help them creatively. I like to say that I stay away from it, but that's not entirely true, because the drums on the record were more or less AI.
Right.
Whereby I used Logic Pro on a Mac to do the majority of my ideas. There's so many loops and things that you can just draw into your session and go, what's that? Oh, it's this weird noise. Does that work? It works. That's cool.
Yeah.
Right. And they have tools that are advancing every single day. And one of the tools that I used, just because it was convenient and it saved me time, was they have something, I think it's something called something else now actually, but at the time called the drummer track. And you could come up with a riff. I would just a basic beat, come up with a riff and flesh it out, and then bring in the drummer track, drag it out, and it would, I don't know how it does it, but it listens to what you've got, and it comes up with fills at the appropriate spot and beats.
Transitions.
Yeah. And so that sped things up for me. And I just took that, turned it into MIDI, and made all my adjustments that I needed to from there, aside from Manoinoi, because Manoinoi, my son came up with the whole thing.
Right.
And then everything else I just did myself. So would I do that again? I don't think so, personally. But it definitely helps to have somebody else there with you. And I guess one facet or downside to home studio recording, especially when you're by yourself, is not being able to spitball off of somebody.
Yeah, it's just bouncing in between your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't get a lot of like contact to the outer world as per se. Like I try to engage as much as I can, but for the most part, it's like it's really just like like when people go like, what's your criteria for bringing on a guest? I said, imagine you're cooking spaghetti and you want to find out if the spaghetti is cooked.
Yeah.
I was like, except instead of one noodle, I'm taking the whole pot of spaghetti and I'm just whipping it as hard as I can at the wall. And then all the people that say, yeah, I'll come on. Yeah, I'll come on. Yeah, I'll come on.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's generally, I just reached out to a lady yesterday and she does art with like traditional Chinese paper.
Okay. Is her name Megan?
No, it's like I have her name right here actually. Her name is Anju Park, and she practices henjai.
Yeah, calligraphy, right?
Yeah, it's like it's like a traditional like Chinese tissue paper.
Cool.
But yeah, it is difficult because like as much as I would want to like engage more, I find that it has like a deteriorating process where it's like the more I ask people now, like 0.1% of their idea is now like built a seed of doubt, and then I ask this person like, you could do this, and you're like, fuck, and then you ask this person like, yeah, it's good, but and then eventually whatever you were thinking is now just like 50% other people idea. So do you find that's like true with you, or do you find like you are like you tend to like try to get more feedback? Because I see you're getting a review a lot on like websites and articles and stuff like that, right? So like where does that come in, and like how do you kind of like manage your ego through that?
Wow. That's the question right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we talked earlier, Ryan, about if I walk you through the recipe for French onion soup, there's a gauge for whether you made French onion soup, and there's even a gauge as to whether you made great French onion soup, and we can decide that before you open the doors to your restaurant and serve it to the public.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that with a song? How do you know that you've written a great song? And it's hard. I guess like feedback from your peers. Yeah. And you have to find people who in your hive who are willing to, I don't want to say necessarily just give you accurate feedback because you can't touch, taste, smell music. It's difficult. A lot of times people will just go, yeah, it's good. That's when you know it's not. Yeah. And the reason I say you know it's not is because music should be visceral. Like we were talking about dance music. What makes people want to move to it? And if there's anything I got from Quincy Jones, it's if it gives you goosebumps and it makes you move, you've got to be right. You can't guarantee that it's going to be successful, but you know that you've done your best because when you listen to that song, it slaps, it grooves, you've got goosebumps. And to put that further, Quincy Jones is responsible for having written the #1 selling record of all time. Right. Which is Thriller from Michael Jackson. Right. Not every single song on that record was huge. No. And I think that's what we need to understand is that Quincy Jones put in the exact same amount, and Michael Jackson put in the exact same amount of work on every single one of those songs. They made sure that every single one of those songs gave them goosebumps and slapped and made them move. And some people just went, eh. Exactly. And that happened with my own record. Where the song Togetherness, for example, I wrote it, I like it, it's a great song. I put it at the back of the album. I put it at the back of the bus because Ryan, I was like, whatever. Right. I handed it into the album to the label, and they came back and said, this Togetherness song is amazing. Let's do this as a single. And I went, huh? Yeah. What do you mean? And then we released it, and I got all this incredibly positive feedback, and I went, huh? I'm over it now. But doesn't that like affect your like creative processing where now you're like, have I even been prioritizing the right thing? That's all along. That the hardest part about coming out with a debut album as a solo artist, as an instrumental guitar player is I don't know. I know how to make a song that follows the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to make a song that's going to give me goosebumps. It's going to slap. It's going to do all the things. It's going to tell a story that I like listening to. That when my wife walks by, she doesn't go, "You're just jizzing all over the world right now. We don't need you to jizz all over the world. We just need you to make a song." So like Mustard and Ketchup, for example, I had to redo a couple of times because I knew where I wanted to go with that record. And that is an homage to Quincy Jones.
Right.
So if you listen back to Mustard and Ketchup and think specifically the album Thriller, then you'll recognize where I was going with that tune. But I wanted to have my moment where I'm like...
And did you find like it was just like you just couldn't, like you had to look at and say like this just ain't, like it's good and it's what I'm trying to do and it's what I'm trying to flex, but like it's not going to come out right in the wash.
That's what my wife was there for.
Yeah.
She walked by and I was so proud of myself. I said, "Look, like, dear, look at what I did." And I hit the space bar and she was just like, "No." And I was like, "Fine." And then that's where you hear what you have now, which actually almost came out in anger. So part of the reason that some of the songs came out the way they did or sound the way they do is because I was mad. Mm-hmm. I was like, you know what? Fine. Hit record, and I just start going and making something. And also I used real amps.
Right.
In today's day with home studios and AI,
you would just plug them right in.
Yeah, there's musicians that have never touched grass when it comes to this sort of thing.
You don't actually know the authentic sound.
Correct.
Right.
You don't know that what you're hearing actually is what it is or it isn't. And there's so many presets. There's even plugins now that have one knob, and you just dial that in, and there you go. You don't touch anything in a very complex signal chain.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. Very dangerous to fuck your shit up.
It is.
You're like, even when you talk about like AI audio, it's like, optimize it. And now like only you're talking and the guest is, and you're like, I thought this was I thought this was studio sound, man.
Yeah. I thought this was supposed to help me.
Yeah.
And here I am starting back over. So yeah, always learn your trade. If you're going to go in there and be a recording engineer, always try to learn that trade as best as you possibly can so that you can have an advantage when the AI tools don't work and you have to do it by hand, so to speak. And so, yeah, my wife walked by and she's just like, "No, that's not it. Like, you're just
all over it.
All over it." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I came up with what is there, and there are juxtaposition moments on the record whereby Mustard and Ketchup is certainly one of them. It's an ode to me in culinary. And a lot of times people are like, "Mustard and ketchup? That's so simple." And I'm like, hey, mustard and ketchup is at the
main ingredient.
Main ingredient, like all kinds of stuff.
For everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like next song I could just call, a chicken and an onion. Like that's the root of everything.
Yeah. Flour.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Flour and water.
Yeah. It's like, I could literally make whatever you want out of flour and water. Exactly. Add a little sugar and make it sweet, like
totally.
But it's crazy.
Yeah. So that was kind of that, and I wanted it to be a dance tune, and I wanted an homage to the 80s, and there were certain producers that I wanted to emulate, and Quincy Jones came up, so there was that. And what ended up happening was you hear what you hear, which I still almost have a hard, like I said, I blacked out and I woke up and this record was done. Mm-hmm. And I'm still rehearsing the record to this day and dissecting it and going over it and making sure I'm playing the parts correctly. And there are times where I even struggle to play what it was that I recorded. And it's like, how
does that happen?
How does that happen? I must have blacked out literally. And there it was.
My question would be so this album came out December of 2024.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
December of 2024. How long, in terms of like, in your mind, or because again, this is a new experience for you, like releasing an album, but now like looking at it, it's been over a year. How much now do you lean on this album that you released and like relish in the accomplishment and stuff like that? And how much are you like propelled to create? Is there like one of these things where like once you get one tattoo, you can't stop getting tattoos, right? Of like you're trying to like, and you can't do the same tattoo. You got to do a bigger size, right? Yeah. So it's like, is there that type of motivation of like, oh, this is just the beginning, and like, well, now I've just set the foundation for what I can stack onto next.
Correct. The goal I guess you could say, for this album was to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Logistically wise, or like structure the album? Like, what does figuring it out mean?
All of the above. Can
Okay.
I write the instruments? Can I record the instruments? Can I mix the instruments? Can I master the instruments? I started to overcook the mix, and that's when I was able to thankfully find Kevin Uliak of Vintique Sound, so power to him. He was actually able to listen with a fresh pair of ears and say, this sounds great, you're just overcooking it. So stop overcooking it.
Yeah. You're doing too much.
You're doing too much. Just go like 2 steps back, and there it is. And then, we'll put the finishing touches on it. Because I tried 2 other mastering engineers before him. All they did was just compress the snot out of it, hand it back to me. And after the first guy...
just go like this.
Yeah.
Mita.
Mm-hmm.
Money now.
Yeah. So after the first guy that did that, I just said, I can do that myself. I can just compress the snot out of it.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, let's try another guy. Tried another guy. He just compressed the snot out of it. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to do this myself. And then probably like 6 months later, I got another inkling to just try looking again. And that's when I came across Kevin, and he came back with notes. He was very personable. He was actually a person on the other end of the line. And I think that's also very powerful in terms of AI is be a person, because AI is now here to take away somebody's job.
Mm-hmm.
Be a person.
Yeah.
Because if I'm just going to send it off to a mastering engineer who's not going to give me any notes, not going to give me any conversation, all he's going to do is compress the snot out of it. Number one, I can do that myself as a trained engineer. But AI can also do that.
Yeah, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the point, right? It's and even when you like look at like even just collaborating or like collaborative efforts alone, like was the decision not to seek collaboration because like you were kind of just figuring it out on your own? Like, was that a deliberate thing, or was there like some things that you kind of got inklings on, but it was like, I don't think I could kind of like, I don't think I could see this through, or I don't think I would like, it's a freaking dog. It's like, was that ever a thing of like, I would love to do this, but I don't know if I could kind of like facilitate it in its whole. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna wait.
It's a brutal answer, Ryan, and that is that I work faster than a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's nice to be able to spitball, it takes time to find that person to spitball with. And that's where my wife really became
A co-producer.
a co-producer, basically, because Lord bless, I ended up finding an incredible partner in the world, and she and I are on the same wavelength, and we're able to spitball on so many things. It's absolutely incredible.
Well, it's funny you say that, because there's a term I always go like, man, I should be out more, I should be doing more shit. But they were like, loneliness is a sin you have to atone for a complexity of mind.
Uh-huh.
It's like, if you don't think like most people, or you don't have the same visions of most people, it's like you have to realistically look at yourself and just go, yeah, it's just because like the conversations that I have with people, it fucking annoys them, or it bores them, or they're just not interested. They just don't think the way that I think.
Right.
So like, it's just one of those like humbling moments where you're just like, it is what it is.
You know, when you're awesome, Ryan.
It is very weird, because again, it comes down to that managing ego of like when you have to turn around and say like, even people like that I work with, like a lot of the compliments that I'm getting, it like comes with this like survivor's guilt, where you're like, oh, I like, even one guy came up to me and he was like, hey man, like you interviewed this guy, Sharif Noor, he came on and it was at the beginning of Ramadan, and we talked about like Muslim faith and like what Ramadan is and kind of all of those things. And I had people of Muslim faith coming to me and saying like, hey, I am of Muslim faith and I even learned something.
Wow.
Right.
Very
And
cool.
you're like, wow, that's really cool. But then like you're like, oh, but yeah, it's cool, but like, thanks, but like, I'm just doing my best. You know what I mean? Because you're like, the last thing I want to be seen as is like, yeah, I'm a fucking rock star. Like, fuck yeah.
I had to drop a lot of that ego in order to do this, because The only thing that really is available, again, going back to songwriting, is who has left successful trails. And the best thing I can tell you, Ryan, is that Quincy Jones, for example, going back to Quincy Jones, has released lots of songs. And you can count how many exploded and made him a millionaire. You have no control over that.
Yeah, that's the craziest part.
Yeah. So,
and even the things you think
mm-hmm.
are like, yo, this is the one.
Yeah.
This is the fucking thing.
Yeah.
And then you put it on, it's like, and you're like, I have no idea. I am bewildered.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. You know, and like going back to Metallica, they have so many great songs. How come Enter Sandman? I can break down with you why Enter Sandman is a great song, but I can also break down why every
song
is a great song, right? So if there is a success, it's when you release it and the world, for some reason, at that point in time, says, yes, here it is, this song.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes years for, say, Toto's Africa to all of a sudden become such a huge song for Toto. And I was watching an interview recently with the guitar player. His name is escaping me at the current moment, but also actually did a lot of work with Quincy Jones, studio session guy. Somebody in the comment section will probably,
hopefully,
let me know. But he was like, Africa? Really? At this stage of the, like, what? And after talking to so many musicians on my podcast, big ones who've been at it for a long time, I remember chatting with Ville Valo from Him, for anybody out there who shares, the gothic metal days of the early 2000s. And I asked my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm about to chat with Ville Valo. Do you want to come say hi? And she was like, no, I'm okay. I'm good. I got it. Because like even she remembers, right? And chatting with this guy. And one of the big things that I learned to come to expect when I did this is all you can do is all you can do.
Yeah.
Learn your craft, study the game, do what you can, but once it's out there, you have no control anymore over what people think of it, how they perceive it, or what's going to be big, what's not going to be big. And most importantly, Ryan, it's probably going to be the songs that you don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the song that you just threw on there as a filler, and all of a sudden it's
a banger.
It's a banger. And that happened to Rick James, actually. The She's a Freak song or whatever.
Right.
The record he turned in the record. The record label came back and said, we don't hear a single. So he went back into the studio, taking the piss.
Just did one
to take the piss.
Right. Because he's like, they just asked me, so I'm just going to do one.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do one. Rest is history, right? So, and it's funny, like you listen to that song, you're like, no, that song's a banger. Like, how did you not know? But now that you know that he's taking the piss, go listen to that song again.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, okay.
Okay, yeah,
I will. I'll listen to this after the
Yeah, I get it now. He's definitely doing that. So, yeah, all you can do is, like Bob Seger said, just write the songs. Like, how is he supposed to know?
Build it and they'll come.
Yeah, how is he supposed to know that Like a Rock was going to become the anthem for Chevy? He didn't.
Yeah.
But you have to build that catalog and work that catalog. And that's my next steps from here is to say, okay, here's this foundation that I've built. Here's this calling card. Where can I go from here? Because it's a big calling card. Mm-hmm. People have said, the record sounds great. Who did it? I did it. So if anybody needs help mixing, recording.
It opens you up to like a whole nother avenue.
Correct.
Of what you're trying to do.
Correct. I'm rehearsing the songs. I rehearsed them earlier today. Currently, I'm set up with backing tracks. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just going through the motions of ensuring that I can do that. I've got playthrough videos planned. Mm-hmm. So I'm revamping my skills in videography, lighting, all these sorts of things so that when I make a playthrough video, it doesn't just look like trash I threw up on YouTube.
Just getting it done.
Yeah. So the hardest part, even though writing the music is hard and putting together a cohesive album is hard, what comes after that is the real work, which is working the record. And I'm only one guy, and I still have a full-time job and a family. So my working of the record is slower than I would like it to be compared to, like, let's say I was with a band and maybe had more free time, and working the record would be playing shows, making videos, going on podcasts like this. I'm working the record right now.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Yeah. This This is the other work.
Right. Yeah, like all of the intangibles,
Correct.
as you would call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, this was really cool. It's inspiring, right, to see people just like take it into their own hands, and even Cheryl from Valley Despair. It was just one of these things where she was like, "I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I don't know what's gonna happen, but like I'll figure it out." Right? And like you figured it out, man, and like I'm very, very excited to see what your journey has to come next, and see what type of music and art and any type of creative thing you have to release. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners or anything? How can we get a hold of you? What's the social media? We'll put all of them in the description, but what social medias are you most prevalent on?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. Thank you. And thank you again for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to spend this time with you. Everybody can listen to the record wherever it is that you consume music on streaming services. So I'm available on Spotify, Apple Music. You can also buy the record on Bandcamp. You can buy the record on iTunes. And if you go to my website, jonharris.ca, there will be a link tree that can take you to those places, as well as my socials. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. The handle is Jon Harris Rocks.
Jon Harris Rocks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that has been another episode of Solo Spotlight. I'm your host, Ryan McDougall. If you've enjoyed this episode, consider liking it, subscribing, sharing this to your friends that also like music, creativity, inspiration, and expect future episodes with future amazing guests. And that has been it. Thank you very much.